Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hope you're having an amazing day. Mark CERNY has done it again. He has actually incorporated a future GPU architecture inside the PlayStation 5 Pro, much like we saw with the PS4 Pro, which of course included Vega, despite the fact that the GPU was largely based around Polaris. In the case of the PS5 Pro though, it's RDNA 4 which is going to be utilized, which explains the absolutely huge performance increase when it comes to ray tracing. This also actually gives us a lot more insight into what we can expect for RDNA 4 for the actual PC as well. As well, now we can really kind of get a great idea that RDNA 4 as well as RDNA 5 when it releases is going to be actually really good for ray tracing, and it's going to be a lot more NVIDIA-like in the performance. There's a lot of stuff to get through here, and of course we're going to get right into it after this message from the sponsor of the video. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. So a couple of days ago, some slides did leak online from Moore's Law is Dead, which basically gave us a good overview of what we can expect from the GPU of the PlayStation 5 Pro. In a nutshell, it seems that the performance of the GPU was significantly higher. We'll get more into that in more in depth in a moment, but the ray tracing performance was really where we saw most of the performance increases. Basically, for ray tracing, it was between a 2 to 4 times increase over the base model console, and for the actual traditional rasterization performance, so in other words, graphical stuff which isn't ray tracing, it was around a 45% increase. There was also a new upscaling technology which Sony are going to be using, and now basically we have a lot more insight into the CPU and a bunch of other stuff. So Tom Henderson from Insider Gaming was given some additional slides. Unfortunately, he couldn't make the slides themselves publicly available, so it's only the contents of the slide, and this is basically because he didn't want someone to get in trouble. Well, because sometimes slides are watermarked, and well, let's just say it can be a thing where you can't easily tell where a slide has been downloaded from, but Sony or the company can. Let's just put it that way. Anyway, the CPU is still going to be based on the Zen 2 microprocessor architecture. This is something that myself and Kepler and a couple of other folks have leaked. But the difference is here, the CPU is increased in clock frequency. Now, it seems like the actual CPU is identical to the base model console. The difference is that the CPU is running at a higher frequency, 10% higher if we actually believe these numbers. It's 3.85 gigahertz. But that's in the high CPU frequency mode. There is also another mode where it runs at a slower speed, so it's basically the same speed as the base model console. However, in doing this, obviously the CPU will be a lower frequency, but when you're running in the high CPU frequency mode, what happens is the GPU itself is downclocked by around 1.5%, and this means that you're going to be seeing around a 1% drop in GPU performance. So if we actually compare this back to the PS4 to the PS4 Pro, it's actually a much smaller uptick in performance. The PS4 was using a Jaguar, and it was running at 1600 megahertz, and the PS4 Pro, I think it was like 2133 megahertz, somewhere around there. So it was around a 33% increase. Also, this frequency is significantly higher than the frequency that I was hearing touted. Now, I don't know whether this is simply a case of Sony decided to not go with those frequencies or whether my information was wrong, although honestly, the sources that told me this stuff also gave me a lot of the same information that seemed to be true in terms of the number of workgroup processors and memory speed. So It's possible that Sony have had a change of heart. It's possible that maybe it's because they settled on the 6nm process, or, and this is something that Kepler L2 was mentioning on Twitter, it could be something to do with backwards compatibility and the PlayStation 6. Basically speaking, unless Sony changes something, which is always possible, the CPU frequency of the new console needs to be higher than the older console it's kind of emulating, essentially. So it's very possible that AMD will be using like dense cores, like one of the Zen dense cores going forward. There's like Zen 4 dense, Zen 5 dense, and Zen 6, you get the idea. And those CPU cores, they are, in other words, they are literally just physically smaller. There are some architectural changes as well, basically down to the cache, but essentially the core itself is just shrunk. And so because of that, the frequency of the CPU is significantly less. However, it also means that it takes up less physical die space, and you've also got the benefit of them, well, gobbling less power. So maybe that's one of the reasons the dense cores as well as the normal cores also have the same CPU instructions, so there's basically parity there. Honestly, I'm not so sure. It'll be very interesting to see if Mark Cerny, for example, does a road to PlayStation 5 Pro or whatever, and kind of gives us insight into the decisions around that. Either way, this is going to be a very interesting thing for the console going forward. Now, it also seems that the audio units are going to be running at a much more performant clock frequency. It says that they're 35% more performance. Now, interestingly, this is something that I'd heard from a source, although I'd heard that the initial target was a 2x increase. I don't know, again, whether that was just, you know, an early target they'd considered, because basically I was hearing that they may double the number of actual units in the machine, but instead it seems that they've just basically run them at higher frequencies. And obviously this does make a lot of sense. It's going to be interesting to see how developers actually leverage this. As for other elements of the machine, the memory configuration is exactly what we've been hearing for quite some time. Basically, it's the same amount of memory, 16 gigabytes, but the difference is it's running at a higher frequency. So that, of course, in turn is going to provide more memory bandwidth. The GPU, basically, this pretty much reconfirms what we'd heard previously. It's 45% faster than the base model console for rasterization. 2 to 3x times ray tracing performance, but in some outlier cases it could be up to 4x, 33.5 teraflops, and has this newfangled PlayStation Spectral Super Resolution. Now, there's another article from Insider Gaming, this popped up a little bit later, and basically, PlayStation's ambitions with PSSR is to achieve 4K 120 FPS and 8K at 60 FPS. However, they specifically state that these targets are not for the PS5 Pro due to hardware limitations. So it's basically for future versions of the console. So essentially, this can support up to 4K, but eventually we could see up to 8K at 30 FPS. But it's unsure at this point what's going to happen with those milestones, whether it's going to be surpassed or bettered or what. And again, we're looking at around 250 megabytes of memory actually being allocated for this. That's 180 megabytes from the PSML library, which I'm assuming, I'm not certain about this, so yeah, PlayStation Machine Learning Library, and also 64 megabytes for the game itself. Now, again, the PlayStation 5 Pro does have an awful lot of GPU performance when it comes to the actual machine learning elements. It seems there's around 300 tops, which is, well, a good chunk. And I think this statement really does reinforce that Sony are going to be pushing machine learning heavily. In fact, in a PlayStation 6 video, which I can't remember when I put that out, maybe a month or so ago, I was basically saying that, from my understanding, Sony are going to be really pushing machine learning for the console. Now, while that may seem an obvious point, simply because of what's going on in the industry right now, it's not just going to be upscaling. And things like ray tracing reconstruction is going to be leveraged, of course, but I've also heard there's going to be things like advanced physics. There's going to be really impressive stuff for character modeling and artificial intelligence, like you'll be able to basically do natural language communication with NPCs, that's one thing. How that's actually incorporated, obviously not all games will do this, For example, if you're playing, I don't know, like Call of Duty single player, it probably wouldn't make much sense to be able to randomly speak to, let's say, an enemy soldier on the other side. But if you're playing, I don't know, like an RPG, then be able to like talk essentially to someone and have some level of communication. Obviously, you know, it's going to be early days initially, but it's going to be very cool stuff. And I think that the next generation consoles are going to be really impressive. If you recall from a recent statement, I don't remember who said it on the Microsoft team, because I'm an idiot, but I can't remember, it wasn't Spencer. I think it was one of the women on the Xbox team. I can't remember their name. But basically they stated that, was it Spencer? I don't remember. Either way, they basically said that the next generation of Xbox is going to be the most impressive. It's going to be like one of the largest leaps in history. And ultimately, I don't think this is just going to be like a performance metric, you know, as in like, oh, the resolution of textures or whatever. It's going to be a lot of other attributes, of course, are going to make a generation. It's not just, I don't know, like the quality of models or the you know, lighting improvements. So I think that's going to be something that Sony as well are going to be really, really pushing for the next generation. So yeah, I think that the PlayStation 5 Pro, in terms of kind of giving a developer almost like a playground for moving forward, it's going to be really cool. Ultimately, it's going to be Sony's own internal teams which really push the hardware. I don't mean to be disrespectful for any specific team here, but at the end of the day, if you're like a smaller studio or whatever, you just don't have the resources to like really maximize the you know, the PS5 Pro version and the Xbox Series X version and so on. You're just going to kind of like, I wouldn't say to do the bare minimum, because that's really not quite what I mean, but you're not going to push everything to the absolute limit. However, I think someone like Insomniac, you can bet your bottom dollar they will. And as we've spoken about several times on the channel before, because of that hack, basically, with Insomniac, which happened, we know that Wolverine, which of course is being worked on right now by the team, they actually specifically state in one of the slides. You can also Google this as well. I don't really want to put the slide in a video. It's quite easy to find if you do a Google, but I don't want to put it in the video because it was, you know, kind of obtained by a hack, and I don't really want to put that in the video in case I get spanked by Sony. But basically it states in there that they're pushing like machine learning and upscaling technologies and other stuff. So this is something that Sony are going to be really working on, especially internally, and obviously they can use that to kind of show what this console is capable of. Now, I have been teasing you guys that the ray tracing performance is significantly better. Kepler L2 actually did a pretty good job of just making this pretty succinct. So basically, Turing, RDNA 2 and RDNA 3 did 4 boxes / 1 triangle. Now Ampere went up to 4/2. Lovelace is 4/4, and RDNA 4 seems to be 8/2. So basically speaking, this is going to be a little bit similar to Lovelace in terms of the ray tracing performance. There are some slight differences in how that's going to, you know, work in reality, but this really does go to show, I mean, there's a reason that, according to their numbers anyway, that's, you know, what was in the development documents of the PS5 Pro, it's around a 2 to 4 times increase over the base model console. Now, of course, there are also differences in the actual GPU itself in terms of the specification. For example, there's going to be a different number of TMUs, and from what we understand anyway, they're going to continue to use the TMUs for the ray tracing, basically. So obviously, you know, a different number of TMU and all this other stuff is also going to be somewhat, you know, partly responsible for this, but it's going to be really interesting for RDNA 4 going forward. It should, in theory, mean that the N48 silicon, obviously, again, that's going to be somewhat down to software, it should be able to spank the higher-end RDNA 3 GPUs. And that's really good news going forward for RDNA 5 for the PC. So RDNA 4, it seems like it's going to launch late this year or early next year for PC, depending on who you believe. Like, I'm hearing multiple things from multiple people. RDNA 5, however, obviously is going to be quite a bit later, and RDNA 5 is also going to be like the chiplet-based design. So I think AMD will do pretty well. It'll be interesting to see what they build on with RDNA 5 for ray tracing, because obviously by that point, Blackwell is also going to be, well, out. And Blackwell, I'm really hearing some very good things for the ray tracing. So if you're unfamiliar, if you're more of a console gamer, basically at the moment for NVIDIA, RTX 40 is currently the architecture of choice. And then obviously next architecture is going to be RTX 50, which is powered by Blackwell. And that is going to be really impressive from a visual standpoint. So basically, Mark Cerny's team has done quite a lot of really interesting stuff for the PS5 Pro. I will be very curious to see in terms of frame rates what's going on. I don't really believe that all games are going to be running at 60 FPS base. I would love to be wrong. I think it's going to be... basically, if a game is struggling because of the CPU on the base machines, it's not going to be hitting 60 FPS on the Pro. Maybe with frame generation technologies, but, well, first of all, we don't know whether frame generation exists on the PS5 Pro, upscaling stuff, and even if it supports something like FSR, which FSR 3 should theoretically run the PS5 Pro, frame generation on FSR, it usually requires a higher frame rate than 30. It's best with something like 60 FPS, so... I wouldn't be surprised, however, if they do a lot of like variable rate refresh stuff, like 40 or whatever FPS, which would be really cool. And ultimately, here's the thing, the games are just going to look so much better than the base machine. I think titles like Alan Wake, I mean Cyberpunk, if it gets a... I mean, ultimately it depends, like, obviously we can only talk about games which are currently out, and obviously those will need patches, but I think titles like Alan Wake, Cyberpunk, you know, those kind of really visual, impressive games, and that's not including titles like Spider-Man 2, which, you know, Insomniac did a really good job with. I think there was a really obvious reason that they kind of made the game, that is Spider-Man 2, how they did with like the uncapped frame rates, and I think RT is basically in all of the windows and stuff. So, I mean, you can imagine what that game would look like with... Let's even be super pessimistic and say 2x the ray tracing performance, which is basically, you know, they could have so many more reflective surfaces. It would just look amazing. So I think in that respect, you know, if you're interested in a console, gaming at all, and I think there are a lot of folks, even if they're high-end PC gamers, like I love PC gaming, but I'm still going to be picking up PS5 Pro because, like, why the hell wouldn't I? Like, it's going to be cool. So I'll be very interested to see what Sony actually does. The marketing is going to be also quite interesting. An early price point I was hearing was not much more expensive than the base machine. But obviously pricing can change up until the last minute. I'm still hearing basically that essentially we're going to get kind of like a summer-ish announcement. But with all of these leaks which are happening, God knows if Sony are going to decide to like kind of do something sooner. But then again, it's Sony, so they kind of just do whatever the hell they want. With that said, guys, I think that's just about it for this video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.